Hey, welcome back to my channel. So, small disclaimer to start this video. Our air conditioning died this morning. I live in Arizona. It is 110 degrees outside. So I'm going to speed film this and my next video in the same outfit. No makeup, nothing. As fast as physically possible before the cold air leaves my room. I have a fan going too, 2 fans going. So if you hear the sound, I am so sorry. There is nothing I can do about it because I'm pretty sure if I turn them off, I'll have heat stroke. Welcome to the July wrap-up. So July was strangely a really good reading month for me. I didn't get through a ton of books. I got through 7 total, but I had all above a 4-star review. Sorry, I'm looking at my iPad. Let's put it here. I had 2 4 stars, 1 4.5. Actually, wait, no. I had 3 4 stars, 1 4.5, and 3 5 stars. And so let's talk about those really fast. The first book that I read this month was Ninth House by Leigh Bardugo. I already did a whole dedicated review to this one, so if you're interested in watching that, it'll be up here linked and down below. I go into depth. It's like a full just Ninth House review standalone. The only thing I didn't really get to in that, because I think I blacked out while filming it, I don't even remember what I said, was I would die for Darlington, one of the main characters. I love him so much. He's actually one of my favorite characters that I've read so far this year. And yeah, I would die for Darlington. I gave Ninth House a 5 out of 5 stars. I cannot wait to read the next in the series, and it makes me even more excited to read more Leigh Bardugo books in the future. The second book that I read this month was The Bear and the Nightingale by Katherine Arden. So I think that Katherine Arden is very slowly becoming one of my new favorite authors. I mentioned her in my mid-year book freakout tag in a book that she wrote called Small Spaces. That's a middle grade book. And this book is about a small child in a town in a village that believes in kind of the old gods or fairy tale gods where there's a god on the hearth in your stove. There's a god of frost. There's a god that lives in the lake. There's a god that lives or a creature that lives in the woods. There's all these spirits and gods and different things that they believe in and then worship. There's one that lives in the stables that helps take care of the horses. And it's kind of about a mixture of all these different fairy tales, but about her gods and her village's way of life versus the church and believing in just one god. But is that one god who you really think it is? And is it really the divine voice? I gave this a 4 out of 5. Arden is just very much becoming one of my new really respected authors. She has a way of writing young children in a really relatable and playful but just very open and beautiful way, I guess, where a lot of her characters are young. I think the main character in this, you meet her when she's a baby, but most of the time she's between 7 and I would say probably 13 years old. And so to be an adult book more that's focused on such a young character, I think she just did a really great job. And yeah, I don't know what to say about that without ruining it more. But The Bear and the Nightingale by Katherine Arden, I would recommend. It was a 4 out of 5 stars. It is the first book in a trilogy, but I won't be rushing to read the other 2 books just because I have so many other books to read and so many other TBRs made and whatever. But I will eventually come back to the series because I enjoyed it. The next book that I read this month was 8 Perfect Murders by Peter Swanson. I gave this a 4.5 out of 5 stars. This is about a bookstore clerk or owner who at one point in time wrote a blog post for the bookstore's website entitled 8 Perfect Murders, and it was his favorite 8 murders from literary fiction, and just he thought that they were perfect because you would never get caught. And so he wrote this 8 Perfect Murders, and a couple years later an FBI agent comes to the bookstore and says, hey, I think that somebody is completing these murders on your list, specifically following your list. Do you know anything? Do you have any insight you can provide? But he's way more entangled in the situation and in the story than you originally realize. And so it's just kind of like figuring out who is committing these murders, why, how the main character is involved. And yeah, I thought that it was a really like cognizant narrator. He like acknowledges tropes in mystery and in thrillers, and like why some of them are stupid, why he likes some of them, how some of them are in play in this book. And I really enjoyed it. I didn't think it was an overall hard mystery to solve. Like, I did kind of pick up on most of it and like predict what was going to happen, but I really enjoyed it. And yeah, 4 out of 5 stars, 4.5 out of 5 stars. The fourth book I read this month was The Glass Hotel by Emily St. John Mandel. I went into this book thinking that it was a murder mystery book. That is not the case. I gave it a 4 out of 5 stars still because I did really enjoy it. But at first, I was kind of really confused because I didn't understand what it was about. In like the description, it does tell you like white collar crime. Yes, white collar crime happens, but the who, the how, the what, the like isn't necessarily like a huge focus of the book. A lot of it is like how small the world is and how you have kind of two main characters. You start following Paul, who is like a druggie and kind of like this like perpetual like mess up of a child, and him trying to find his place in the world and decide if he's always going to mess up or what. And then his half sister Vincent is the second main character, and you kind of follow her life and how she goes from like being poor and working in like this hotel to being married to this man who eventually commits white collar crime, and how like that affects her life and how living in this world of like richness affects her viewpoint. And so yeah, I don't know, I really can't do a great job of like summarizing this book. This is an absolute disaster, but I would give it a 4 out of 5 stars. I would recommend it. I enjoyed it, but it wasn't what I had expected because it kind of, Vincent goes missing off the board of a ship, and that's like in the description of the book. And you think that like at the beginning that it's kind of be more like murder mystery, kind of like, was she murdered? If so, who murdered her? Why? How? And you do find everything out like about her disappearance, but that's not really the focus of the book. The next book that I read was The Deep by River Solomon. This got a 4 out of 5 stars. I really can't say much about this. It is a book about mermaids who were basically, once upon a time, pregnant slaves were thrown over the side of ships and their babies became mermaids. And every year, every couple of years, they have what's called the Remembering. And the main character is in charge of holding on to and storing all of the memories from the past, like thousands of years, hundreds of years. And she shares them with the colony, basically, and their history and their life. And I don't know, there's not, like, I can't do it justice by really describing what it is. I think you just have to read it. It was very beautiful, very profound, ideas that I never would have thought of, like plot devices. And yeah, 4 out of 5 stars, great book. You just have to read it though. Okay, the last 2 books I read this month both made it onto the greatest books you'll ever read shelf. 5 out of 5 stars, probably 6 out of 5 stars if I did that. They were just great, and they both made me cry like a baby. Shocker. The first one that I read was Us Against You by Frederick Bachman. It is the sequel to Beartown. I cried on the first page pretty much. Mare from Mare Reads, who I'll link down below, I love her. She and I were talking, and we both cried like right off the bat reading this book, so at least I know I'm not alone. You don't really need to read Beartown to read this book, but I don't think you would ever enjoy it as much or get as much out of it if you didn't read Beartown. So Beartown is essentially about this town called Beartown that thrives off their youth hockey team. Their youth and their like young adult hockey team. And that's like their whole culture, their religion, how everything in their society kind of revolves around it. And the star on that team, like, ends up committing a, like, heinous act, and this is kind of the fallout from everything that happened in that book, but also continuing the story of what happens when you choose to do what's right and how you're not always rewarded for that, and how there are consequences, but that sometimes it's better to face the consequences of doing what's right than living with the success or, like, the pros of doing what's wrong. And I don't know, I love these characters so much. This book will stick with me, and Beartown will stick with me for the rest of my life. I bought Beartown. I am going to buy Us Against You. I'm just trying to decide if I want to get a used copy or a new copy, because I bought a used copy of Beartown. I cannot put into words how great these books are. I really encourage you to read them. Frederick Bachman is a great author. He just released a new book, I think, called Anxious People that I really want to read. He is releasing a third book in this series that I believe is called Those Who Run Towards Fire. And I know it's going to wreck me. This book just had me sobbing. I have so many quotes highlighted. I probably highlighted this book more than any other book that I've ever read. But this series is just so special and so great, and he does a great job of, like, he has a very unique narrative style where it's an omniscient narrator where he knows everything, and he, like, the narrator speaks as though they are one of the main characters or live in the town, and then sometimes speaks also removed, but it's, like, a very nice balance. The narrator, or, like, the point of view shifts between different characters really smoothly in different times, and, like, is very cognizant of, like, the future, like, talks about what could have happened or what will happen in the future. So, and it's kind of, like, dropped within, like, you'll be reading about a character, and then they'll be like, oh, in 30 years this character is doing this, or in the future this character went on to do that, but then goes back to present time. So yeah, Us Against You, 5 out of 5 stars. Go read it right now. Greatest book you'll ever read, shelf. Fantastic. And the last book that I read this month was my first N.K. Jemisin book, and it won't be my last, purely because I'll definitely read the rest in this series, but I also now am tempted to read the rest of her writing, because The City That We Became by N.K. Jemisin was a 5 out of 5 stars, greatest book you'll ever read, shelf, just an absolute masterpiece. If you've ever been to New York City, which I've been lucky enough to go 5 or 6 times, this book is one of the purest love letters to the city that I have ever read or experienced. I cannot say enough good things about this. There's representation, cultural, sexual orientation, poor, rich. There's just all different representation in this book. I cried reading this one too. I know that's a shocker. I cry at everything. But this book, like, broke me down in some parts, and just, like I said, it's just such a love letter to New York City and the things that make it special, and, like, what it means to be a New Yorker. And obviously I'm not a New Yorker, but I, like, know enough, and I've been in the city, in different parts of the city enough to, like, know how the people feel there and how this, like, would relate back to them. Just beautiful. One of my friends listened to the audiobook at the same time that I read it, and said that it was, like, the most well-produced, like, fantastic audiobook that she has ever listened to. So I definitely will probably be rereading it by listening to the audiobook because of how, like, much praise she gave that audiobook. Yes, please go read it. The City That We Became. It basically is about, to stop ranting about how good it is and give you the synopsis. So, The City That We Became is about the city of New York. Basically, the gist is that once great cities have lived long enough, like, have been a thing long enough, they kind of develop their own person or avatar or, like, soul, and they transition into becoming a living city. You meet Sao Paulo, and he's the avatar of the city Sao Paulo. And so New York is birthing. New York is birthing into this avatar, into this living person that embodies what New York is. And essentially, something happens to this main avatar, and in the process, 5 other sub-avatars are created for each of the boroughs in New York City, and each one represents their own individual borough. And it's kind of like up to them to band together to defeat this enemy that's like the woman in white, or like, it's hard to explain without you like reading the book or giving it away, but in the gist, she like represents like racism and misogyny and just like everything like bad in the world, and like modernization, and just is just very not great and not a good person and doesn't like represent anything good. And it's like her job to kill cities before they're born, like basically. And so she's infiltrated the city, and yeah, it's the job of the 5 boroughs to destroy her. I am so lost. I am sorry if none of this is making sense today. I am just trying my best. But it says it is a trilogy. It's going to be like the Great Cities trilogy. So I'm not sure if the next book will be about New York or if we'll be introduced to new cities, because the ending kind of leaves it up to both. But pick this up. Let me know what you think. If I had to recommend any of the books that I read this month, it'd be those 3. It'd be Ninth House, Us Against You, and The City That We Became, because they were just so good. So that's all I have for you. I'm going to quickly film my August TBR. Yeah, see you next time.